Hi everyone, I'm Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. I'm so glad you could join me today. As you can see, my set is bare. We're in the process of moving and packing, so hopefully a few more weeks I'll have a nice beautiful set. So today we're going to look at a vintage quilt top. It's a quilt top only. It's not finished. It doesn't have batting, it doesn't have binding, and it doesn't have a backing on it. So it was left unfinished, or in quilt lingo we call that a UFO, an unfinished object. It's also, quilt tops are also called flimsies because, well, they're flimsy, right? I have probably 10 or 12 vintage flimsies in my collection that we will be looking at throughout the year. I'll try to spread them out. What I like about them is that I can see all of the construction and really learn from these flimsies. This particular quilt I am going to hopefully finish because I think it's a really simple quilt and it is something I could do fairly quickly. And with the move, I need that stress reliever of sewing, which I miss desperately because I've been packing instead of sewing. So I'm hoping that I can take some time this weekend and get this flimsy finished. And I will give you an update when I do my updates. So let's take a closer look at this quilt top. Okay, taking a closer look at this quilt, we can see that it's a simple block construction that alternates the fabrics. So we have this denim-like fabric. It is just a lightweight fabric. It's not a full denim. It's just like a denim shirting, okay? And it alternates with another fabric that is a print that is a shirting fabric, and it keeps going. Now on the edges, there are some mix of fabrics in this quilt and of the denim-like. So you can see here, see how these fabrics are different? And you know, I thought at first that this section, this bottom section was added later, but it's not. So it was part of the construction, so I don't know if they ran out, the maker ran out of one or the other and chose to substitute this one, or if it was a lot different or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but there is on the borders, the bottom border especially, there are different colors. The coloration is different here. Like I said in the introduction, the thing that I really like about flimsies or quilt tops is that I can turn it over and really see exactly how this quilt was constructed. And if we look at the vertical rows, you can see how the maker actually basted these rows before taking them to the sewing machine. It is machine sewn, you can see here, but those basting stitches first were done to hold it together. Now when I learned to quilt, that's how I learned to do it. I learned to put basting stitches first and then go to the sewing machine. You have a little bit more control. Now the thing is, what's nice about doing basting first is you have a lot of control of getting your points on. But if we flip this over, you can see these points aren't exactly perfect. Not that that's a big deal, except for I'm surprised to see that, because one of the wonderful benefits of basting your pieces together first is that you can get a really good, accurate construction. Another thing, as we're speaking of basting, is this maker took the edges all the way around and basted them down. I love this idea because I have a ton of flimsies in my own collection, and I love the idea that this prevents it from fraying. Speaking of fraying, there's a lot of strings and a lot of fraying on this flimsy. So that tells me it was probably washed. When I finish this quilt, I will trim these because I don't want these shadowing through onto the front. So if I have like a knot like this and I quilt over that, you could possibly see those threads here, and I don't want that to happen. Another thing that's important to notice about these fabrics is then we got these oddball fabrics like this one, okay? And this fabric to me is kind of like, it didn't really go. But then I started looking and there is another oddball fabric that matches it. Right here. So there are two of these, and that goes to, I think Marianne Fons had said that if you have one odd fabric, make sure it has a friend. And sure enough, it has a friend right here. It has one that is exactly like it. There's a few other oddballs. We have this one, it also has a friend. And then this one which I believe also has a friend. So like I said, this is a flimsy, so it doesn't have the batting, it doesn't have the backing that we can look at, but it is a really great representation of a very simple quilt that could be done easily, especially if you have that last minute gift that you need to get done. You can just cut these squares any size, sew them, and put them together. Now, one thing that's off with this is the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Sometimes we have a very wide one, sometimes we have a very skinny one. So if you are planning on making a quilt like this, just make sure that seam allowance is consistent when you're working with blocks like this throughout. So if you use a 1/2 inch, make them all 1/2 inch. If you use a 1/4 inch, use a 1/4 inch throughout. Even though this isn't a full quilt, it's just a quilt top, there's still many lessons we can learn from this maker. One of them that I'm going to incorporate into my own quilt making is to base down the edges of the flimsies that I have. This is going to prevent fraying, and it's also going to prevent the seams on the edges from coming apart while they're still in storage, which I have quite a few that I need to quilt. So I think that's a really good idea and a good tip that this maker gave me. The next thing that I learned from this, or that we can learn from this, is to use up those odd scrap fabrics and make sure that they have a friend in that quilt. Meaning that if you're going to use an odd fabric, make sure you put it in at least twice. And it makes it look like it's intentional, and makes it look like it's supposed to be there. It gives you that cohesiveness that you need sometimes with the quilt. Another lesson is the consistency of a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If this would have been more consistent, I think that basting technique that the quilter used would have worked a lot better. And I really think that that was where the issue came in. Some of the seam allowances are a scant 1/4 inch, even less, and some are up to a 1/2 inch. So being really consistent with your seams is important when you really want to have that look. Although, I mean, as we've seen in many of the other quilts, does it really matter? I don't know, not really. I still treasure this quilt. I still intend to finish it, and it doesn't really bother me that the points don't match. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and that you get all of those last minute gifts done.